Welcome to the City Infrastructure Committee meeting of 9 June 2020. I declare the meeting open at 10:20 a.m. I'd like to advise meeting attendees that this meeting is being audio recorded. I'd like to begin today's meeting by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we're gathered and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. To councillors are all present, so there's no leave of absences to consider. We'll move on to item 4.1, which is a deputation from the Australian Rail Track Corporation, Inland Rail. I now refer to item 4.1. Before we open discussion on this item, do any councillors have a conflict of interest to declare?
Excuse me, Chair. Councillor Bradley, may I ask, I've got a general business item which isn't public but this is confidential. Do you want me to bring my general business up now or...?
It's actually not confidential, Councillor Bradley.
Okay.
So just as a preamble, originally ARTC briefing was going to be a confidential item, and my understanding is the deputation has agreed to have an open discussion and briefing on ARTC Inland Rail today. If there is a need to move into confidential discussion, we will move into that and close the session, but apart from that, it will be an open and frank discussion for councillors and the residents listening at home. Can the Road and Infrastructure Planning Manager, Mr. Ranawira, and the delegation members from ARTC please enter the discussions?
Yes.
Oh, they're already there.
Thank you. Good morning, councillors. Here, on behalf of ARTC, there are 5 members here. Rob Mcnamara will be making the presentation. Most of the presentation is the project director. Karen Roberts is the project manager. She will be doing the presenting as well. King Long is the project manager, and Nicola Mitchell, and Amanda Quayle. They will take questions. So I'll hand over to ARTC members to come and give the presentation.
Me either. So just for the committee's benefit, we have Mr. Rob Mcnamara is going to be presenting first, as well as Karen Roberts, is that correct?
Oh, you can come here. You sit here.
Whatever works for you.
Whatever works.
Thanks.
I'll stand up if everyone's happy with that.
That's a spirit.
Thank you for the introduction. Thank you, Kamal, in particular, for organising today. Firstly, congratulations to you all on your recent appointment to represent the people of Logan. And in particular, we look forward to interacting with you over the next several years. I think before I talk about Inland Rail, most of you are probably aware of it. It was evident from your election campaigns what some of your positions are, and that's why I think today is a wonderful opportunity to talk about the project, but also to begin to build the dialogue with you. To give it some context, what ARTC is, it's Australian Rail Track Corporation. We were incorporated in the 90s, and the brief for the company was to consolidate Australia's freight network. It's a task that, Inland Rail, ARTC owns about 8,000 kilometres of track in Australia, and we maintain that track, build new track, and effectively we then sell paths and control the train network. So most of the heavy freight in Australia is moved by ARTC, and I think very fortunate and very proud to be able to say in these COVID challenged times, ARTC has played a critical role in moving freight around the country. It's demonstrated the absolute importance of rail. I just thought who we have here today. I have Nicola Mitchell, first on my left. Nicola Mitchell is Inland Rail's Stakeholder Engagement Manager for the project in this area. The Inland Rail project's broken into 13 projects, which I'll explain. Next we have Karen Roberts, who's a project manager who looks after this last section, which is the Kagaroo to Acacia Ridge and Bromelton. Going further across, we have Long Vo, who's a project manager for one of the projects comprising the public-private partnership, so the next project back, which is Calvert to Kagaroo. And we use these names, and all they really are is just battery limits, the endpoints of projects. They're just given geographical names. then finally we have Amanda Quayle, who's the stakeholder engagement lead, so community engagement for that area as well. And I'm, as introduced, I'm the project director I look after a number of inland rails projects from northern New South Wales down to Brisbane. So that's where I fit into the picture. ARTC 25 years ago commenced connecting all of the pieces of freight in Australia. The tracks weren't connected, lots of issues. Inland rail is the final piece in the puzzle. So for the first time, with the completion of Inland Rail, we'll actually have a national freight network whereby you can actually move freight from Western Australia to Brisbane or to Melbourne double stacked. It's a major piece of infrastructure that when the government announced the funding back in 2017, it was a commitment by both sides of politics to actually finally bring the national freight work together. As I said, it's comprised of 13 projects. The bulk of those projects, all of the projects in Victoria, like Kangaroo or Acacia Ridge, are brownfield, meaning we're upgrading existing track to cater for whether it be double stacked or cater for heavier trains. Most of New South Wales, we're upgrading existing track. The top end of it is brown. There's a couple of very big greenfield sections in the northern sections, and then Queensland, apart from Kangaroo or Acacia Ridge, is all greenfield. What does that mean? That means the bulk of the money is the capital expenditure is for Queensland. So Queensland is a big beneficiary during the construction phase, but importantly, it's a beneficiary ongoing. I think it's important to actually understand Queensland's had a narrow gauge network. Inland rail is actually what we call dual gauge. So for Queensland, they'll be able to run narrow gauge trains and standard gauge trains. Huge efficiency that'll deliver itself. So that's a bit of context what ARTC is and what Inland Rail in particular is. And if we have the... Who's going to drive? Someone's got to drive the presentation. Kate, you move on from there. I think that's broadly what it is, and if you really want to look in detail, you can actually see the brownfield and the greenfield sections. You can see fundamentally the yellow sections of the greenfield. That's where the expenditure largely is at the capital. As I said, Queensland's about 7 billion, about 70% of the expenditure and 7,000 jobs during construction. So for Queensland, it's a winner, particularly the Darling Downs and Lockyer Valley. Less so this area directly. However, there will be, because of the opportunities right next door in Long's area, huge opportunities during the construction phase. Yep, that'd be great. This is really, it's just basically saying when it was put on the infrastructure priority list, it's highlighting the commitment of the government by declaring it a major project as early as 2016. It does actually show the federal government's thinking. The previous government was also a huge supporter of it. I think the biggest criticism we have of the current federal opposition with the leader, Anthony Albanese, who has to be credited with doing the heavy lifting to drive this project forward. His criticism is if we were in, we'd be doing it faster. So I think it's fair to say there is bipartisan support, which from our perspective has been terrific given that the project's fully funded. We look here, this really just summarises it all, and it summarises the project, how you actually progress a project. You start out with a concept, or you start out with an idea. This idea started, its real genesis started in 2001. It had been talked about for over a century, having a standard gauge network on the east coast of Australia. But in 2001 is when the project kicked off. And if you go out to Gundawindi, the then Deputy Prime Minister, John Anderson, he actually drove a dog spike, a rail spike, into a rock, and it's still there to this day. And it was the commencement of the construction, so 20 years ago. We finally commenced construction last year on a section of Parks and Narromine, but it takes that long to get it right. And that's what we spent 20 years doing, and through various phases of support. But it really began in 2015. I'll leave it there, I'll talk to the history. 2015 is when we actually really kicked off in earnest, when a series of studies were done to determine the corridor. If you think of building a rail line from Melbourne to Brisbane, you start out with somewhere from the east coast of Australia to the Queensland border, the western border, and then gradually you bring it narrower and narrower. In 2015 we determined the alignment, and this is how when we come up with the way through, we've looked at people saying, why don't you go to Warwick, why don't you go to Gladstone? This has all been looked at a lot of times in the end, and this is exactly what drives why we're coming to Brisbane, if you actually look at this slide here, this determines what is what are we actually doing. Everyone assumes, and incorrectly assumes, that rail is about export. The large part of inland rail, almost 70% of it, is about from domestic market. So it's producing goods in, say, Melbourne, bringing them to Queensland. When you actually look at what actually happens, what sort of things get moved, it's everything from washing machines through to Coca-Cola, through to cereal, through to alcohol. And if anyone is genuinely interested, you can go out to Bromelton, SCT, which is a freight mover on trains. They actually have a terminal out there at the moment, and you can begin to see what the freight task really looks like. So it's not just all about export. That's a relatively small part of inland rail. Inland rail is about going into intercity freight, whether it be from Perth to Melbourne or to Brisbane and everywhere in between. And that explains why we've largely chosen the route and why the people's obsession is you can't get to the Port of Brisbane, which I should dispel that myth. You can get to the Port of Brisbane currently, you just can't get there on double-stack trains. If you look at that slide, the bulk of stuff coming in double-stack trains will be domestic consumption. It won't be most bulk exports, including coal, including grain. They don't actually go on double-stack containers. You can export you do export grain in containers, but largely it's because of the weight. It'll be single-stacked. We look at here. This is aren't we doing a wonderful job? I think you can look at this two ways. We spent, it's in excess of $700 million now. This reflects that we've almost completed the construction of the first of those 13 stages. That was round Parkes to Narromine. Why did we do it there? We did it there because that's where we joined the east-west line, the line from Perth across to Australia. We joined it at Parkes. Since 1998, they've been able to have double-stack containers coming from Parkes, coming from Western Australia. But when they get to the east coast, we break the trains that have to be broken at Parkes and only had single-stacked. And so that meant the reason being, and it's largely the work that happens in this area, we're going to do, it's actually doing track lowerings. The bridges are either too high, so we lower the track or remove the bridge. It's actually, that was the constraint. So if you think inland rail, by removing that constraint, we almost double the efficiency of the East Coast Freight Network, which is a terrific opportunity. At the moment, another example, to get from Melbourne to Brisbane, you can do it on the current line. As many of you know, the lines exist already. It takes roughly 33 hours. That's if a train leaves on time, everything goes to plan, it'll do it in 33 hours. Inland rail, if the train's capable, it can do it in under 24 hours. This is when we went to the market, what do you want? They said, we want that. We also want a 98% reliability, which means if a train leaves on time, 98% of the time it's going to arrive on time. Trucks do this, they transit the trip in 27 hours. So 3 hours on a just-in-time business model that most businesses run now, it's a huge efficiency. So what does this translate to for business? This translates to dramatically reduced freight costs, which is one of the key inputs for moving freight around. So we go on from there. This is just the sell. Aren't we doing a great old job? But the numbers are real. This is prior to COVID. These numbers, you can imagine now the importance of inland rail, like many other infrastructure projects, has been part of the COVID recovery for Australia and in particular for South East Queensland. So whilst I don't think it's, COVID has not been opportune for us, I think the fact that we're all sitting here socially distancing today, the fact that we've travelled in different vehicles shows the constraints placed on the entire community. But I think going forward, inland rail will be part of the stimulus to doing that. In saying that, I think it's probably recognised the discipline shown by the Council today, by Kamal on the way in, reflects Australia in general. I think Australia is we haven't patted ourselves enough on the back for the terrific job we've done. And going forward, we certainly look forward to be part of that future. This is the section that is of genuine interest to you guys. What it is, this is a brownfield section, it's almost 50 kilometres. I don't want to downplay it because this is unlike a lot of inland rail where it's a relatively low density population. Your area here is actually densely populated. It goes from sort of semi kind of rural through to actually urbanised environment. The fact that it's on existing rail line doesn't mean the impacts are any less. You know, we do recognise that in terms of the actual physical work, We look at this, a crossing loop or passing loop, they're the same thing. That just means what it is when trains pass each other. Here they're stationary, so a train pulls in, another one goes past. That's simply what a crossing loop means. It really is relatively straightforward to work. It's complicated by it's a live track, so we have to actually take possession of that track when there's no trains. The real issue, though, it's not in the construction itself. It's a relatively straightforward construction, but it's in operations. I'm not going to shy away from the fact that at the moment there's about 8 trains a day. Inland Rail by 2040, our demand forecast is saying there'll be up to 45 trains a day. That is significant. It's an important part of the work we're doing now. And I think, to sit there and say, and I don't want to downplay that during construction there will be impacts, but the real impacts are going forward in construction for post-operation, which is why we're focused on understanding those impacts and then in terms working out the mitigations around it. This is just the type of investigations I'm talking about to provide that baseline information to understand what those impacts are and in terms how we manage it. You can see here this forms various from straight engineering work, which informs the designs. Now we do the design, and this is what Karen's entire job's about, managing all the environmental investigations, managing all the engineering designs, then ultimately the construction itself. So we do looking at various things there, from straight engineering right through to cultural heritage and everything in between. Is the project timeline. The concept design was completed, and then eventually you can see what our plan is that we'll award, we award the detailed design in a couple of years' time, and we anticipate that it's in order of two-year build. The big challenge of inland rail is enormous resource demand. Australia's infrastructure is booming in general, and rail infrastructure in particular. There's a demand. You go to Melbourne or Sydney, Perth, Adelaide, they're all undertaking major rail projects at the moment. Last week we saw the next extension of what's called the Sydney Metro. That's an $11 billion project for 23 kilometres of track. That's to go out to the new Sydney airport. The demand for us is we're in a competitive market. We have to compete for those resources, getting whether they be engineers or surveyors or track layers. To do that, we have to schedule the work. To do it, we have to bring it all together at the same time. You think how we have to manage the cash of this business is one of the ongoing challenges, in that until we have it completed, we don't have any revenue. So we put a lot of money out there, and we actually want to do it, have it all come together at the right time, and that's what drives these schedules. Community engagement, it's obviously important all along the alignment, but more so than here in many ways, because it's a very vocal community, which is great. We welcome their feedback. I see that we're a regular feature on Facebook, as recently as last night. There's sort of groups that have lots of opinions. Our whole role is to actually take that feedback and engage. That engagement is crucial to it. It's not always easy. It can be confronting, but it's a fundamental part of why we're here. Look at people. What are their views? People, they mightn't always like what they hear. We mightn't always like what we hear, but it is about engaging and in a positive manner, I think. And it's crucial, and there's been lots of ways. I think the COVID-19's presented us particular challenges, not just here, but right along the alignment, but we have adapted, and I think more recently the social impact assessment sessions were held online and are surprisingly much more productive than we could have hoped for. I think the world will gradually come back to how it was at some point, where we'll actually have much more one-on-one engagement as well as engagement in more public settings. This is again some of the timeframes going forward, what we're looking. You can see through here, but the main message out of this is that engagement's a fundamental part of it. The engineering's straightforward, the approvals are far from straightforward, but the engagement's a key plank of what we do for the next couple of years. And these are all done in parallel. I think Long is going to come up and have a chat. He's the project manager for the Calvert to Kangaroo section. He'll give you a bit of an overview, and Long as Karen's equivalent. Following that, more than happy. This is to be an interactive session, so more than happy to take. I'm sure you got lots of questions. I did read that there's lots of someone here. One of the councillors has done lots of research, and they've got lots of things. So we're really looking forward to addressing those questions, not just now, but going forward. We see this as the first of many sessions that we'll be holding with the council. We welcome the opportunity to be working with you over the coming years. Thanks.
Thank you, Logan City Council, for having us. My name's Long Vo. I'm the project manager for the Calvert to Kangaroo section. It's one of the 13 as well. This section is part of a PPP section, is a public-private partnership, and the project that ultimately would run from Toowoomba, which in Gowrie, all the way to Kangaroo, which is basically right on the border with Logan City Council and Scenic Rim. The section I'm specifically looking after is Calvert Kangaroo, so between Ipswich City Council, Scenic Rim City Council, Regional Council and Logan City Council. It's approximately 53 kilometres. It has, through that section, roughly a crossing loop or passing loop every 10 kilometres. Because the track is a single track, is basically when there's a train coming out of the way, that, as Rob was saying before, that's where they pass. The section is quite through mountainous terrain in the Scenic Rim region, so there is approximately 1 kilometre tunnel through the Teviot Range. And what we have is, where we're at is we've done some significant flood modelling and a reference design to understand the infrastructure that's proposed through that area, which includes roughly 27 bridges, approximately 4 kilometres worth, and then we've got a tie-in where the Scenic Rim Regional Council and Logan City Council meet at the Kangaroo interstate line there, which is just north of Brompton. The next slide, I guess just a bit of context. So top left is Calvert, and Kangaroo is the bottom right, being where it goes through. So as I said, it connects to also connects to the existing QR line up at Ipswich, and then runs through past Willowbank Raceway, if you're familiar with that area, and then down through the Scenic Rim region and Wild Pig Creek Road, and then connecting back onto our current ARTC's interstate line at Kangaroo. The next slide is just a little bit closer. It's from our social pinpoint, which I'll have our engagement lead Amanda talk to. But this section here, I guess just for context on where the project interfaces with Logan City Council, is, if you can see it, just to the left there's a little black circle, which is a proposed level crossing. There's a river there that goes through Dungannon Creek, which is the split between Logan City Council region, local government area, and Scenic Regional Council. I'll pass over to Amanda with some key issues.
Thank you, Long. So for the last 2 years, we've actually been meeting with Logan City Council staff on a monthly basis, whether it's face-to-face or providing written updates. So we've had an opportunity to have council staff provide information and feed into our reference design, and furthermore feed into our EIS. So what I wanted to share with you is, I guess, 3 of their key concerns about our EIS. So one of those is about traffic and transport. So what kind of volumes of trucks when we're doing construction are going to be on Logan City roads, and what impact that'll have to Logan residents. So we've been working with your team to address that and make sure it's captured in the EIS. So I guess it's making sure that during that time, if we can avoid major arterial roads, which is what they've requested. One of the other issues they had was about flooding impacts. So if we're going to be making changes around Wild Pig Creek Road or Undulla Road, and we're adding infrastructure, what does that look like in terms of flooding conditions? How are we impacting people? So we've taken that into consideration for our flood modelling and also captured that in our EIS. And the last thing is access to properties. Same thing, if we're introducing infrastructure, making sure that people have legal access to their properties at all time. So for the next steps for us, we're really looking at submitting our EIS back into the Coordinator General. So we submitted a draft on the 30th of August last year, and we've taken their feedback on board and made a number of iterations, and we're looking to submit that again at the end of this month. Following that, we're hoping that we can then go to public consultation. So we'll certainly advise Council and Kamal, who can share with the councillors when that's going to be available for public comment. And we're hoping that we will be in Q3 out talking to the public, talking about their impacts. We have certainly been talking to landowners for the last few years. They're aware of their individual impacts, whether it might be noise or flooding, and we have a number of different types of communication channels for people to speak with us. We have individual stakeholder representatives for each project, but if they're unaware of who that is, we've got our website, we've got a 1-800 number, we have Facebook, we have email, so there's a number of ways that people can reach us. That's all. Thank you very much.
Are there any other people presenting? Sorry, I didn't catch your name. Amanda. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you, Amanda and Long. That's pretty much the presentation, a very brief overview. More than happy to provide more detail as necessary, but I thought now people have questions, spend the next while having questions, we'll go from there.
Thanks very much for that, Mr Mcnamara, Mr Vo and Ms Quayle. I'll now open the floor to councillors for discussion. Just in advance of that, you mentioned the opposition leader, Anthony Albanese's support for the project, but he could do it better. Well, he could do it cheaper and better. I just think he's described it as appalling, botched from day one, full public inquiry into this debacle, clear the government has failed to consult properly, locals aren't being listened to in prime agricultural land, and he reiterated that back in February as well. So just bearing in mind that the media is certainly portraying that in a much different light than you've given us today.
I think it's probably fair to say, don't misinterpret what I said. I think it's really important. What I pointed out was both sides of federal government or parliament
On a project.
fully support the project. That's very different to me addressing any criticism that anyone has had of the project. It's a very different point. I think it's very important we make a very distinct clarification of what I actually did say.
Thank you very much. First up we have Councillor Bannon. You had a question?
It's not so much a question, it's more of a statement. We talk about community consultation, like that's what we all do as a job. Like for the life of myself and the beauty of having such a unified council is we can't see any reason why we're bringing dual stacked 40 train movements a day through one of the most highest populated areas. I know from anything else that creates noise or dust or any issues, as soon as the suburban moves around it, they shut it down. So for the life of me, I'm slightly affected in Division 9, obviously Division 7 and 11 are highly affected, and I feel for your residents. Our job is to represent our residents, that's our job, and it's mind-blowing to me that people say they consider stuff, but you're putting 40 movements through the back of people's houses, and we're putting 180,000 houses are going to Flagstone. Like, it's almost mind-numbing to me. I know we don't have a decision in stopping it, I wish we did, or even putting it through, but it's ridiculous that it's going through there. Like I said, it's a statement from me. I feel very strongly about it. I've followed it for over 6 years now, from when I did state. So I haven't got a question for you at all. But I know the council support me on that, and I think the council should be doing everything we can to actually listen to our residents and try and get the best outcome we can to try and ease the pain of what they're going to feel from this debacle. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Bannon. Councillor Wilcox.
Do you want to go to Councillor Karansky first?
Oh, pardon me. Councillor Karansky.
I recognise Councillor Wilcox will probably cover off on a lot of what I've got to say, but I just wanted to ask, what benefit do you see to the Logan community as a broader community?
I think the benefits are twofold. I think like any local community that's involved in a construction project, there'll be very clear direct benefits during construction. I mentioned the resource issues that we're facing as a company and as an industry, so I think there will be opportunity for local content, and the commitment of ARTC is that we actually seek local content from our contractors. So I think that's clearly the benefit, and there's obviously
So employment during construction, you mean?
Pardon?
Employment during construction?
Yeah, employment during construction. Mm-hmm. Post-construction, I think Logan will enjoy the benefits that many regional and city and urban population of Australia will benefit from. which is you'll ultimately have access to a supply chain that's much more efficient.
Okay, so that's in terms of Logan specific, though, we would have the benefit that any other resident in potentially Australia or impacted by this line would have. There's no specific benefit to the Logan community as such. For example, there's no intent for any stops in Logan, you're just barrelling straight through, is that right?
This is a freight service. Say someone wanted to put passenger trains on, and that's been a question raised largely by Toowoomba Council and other councils, but largely championed by Mayor Antonio and others. We don't preclude trains. We actually sell train paths. So if someone came along and said, I want to buy a path and put a passenger train on it and fit it into the timetable scheduling, we would actually sell it to them. Yeah.
Okay. And just one other question to your community engagement team. What were the primary, say, top 5 issues that residents have raised as their areas of concern?
So it's been fairly consistent from the beginning with this community. As Rob mentioned, the concerns really are regarding the operational impacts. So once trains are running on the line rather so than in construction. So we've really got 2 main concerns for this area, being noise from the operation of trains and air quality, impacts from the movement of the trains, as well as that a bit around traffic movements, from potential for increased trucks on the road, and people concerned about property devaluation as well. Those would be, I know that's only 4, but those are by far and away the biggest ones.
I'll leave it at that, Madam Chair, and wait for the Divisional Councillor to speak.
Thanks, Councillor Karansky. Councillor Raven, you had a follow-on question from Councillor Karansky?
Yeah, just on one of the questions that Councillor Karansky asked, you said that essentially the major benefit would be some local employment during the construction phase. Do you have a target for that, or are you just chucking it out there hoping you find some locals?
How we actually do it, we have to be careful when we can't ask the question, we can't impose the question, you will be 10% or 20% or 5%. We ask it in a different way. When people bid the job, the contractors bid the job to construct, we actually ask them, what is your local content percentage, and exactly how are you going to achieve that, and what are the mechanisms? And then we monitor that. In the case of the first build we've had, Parks to Narromine, which is a relatively small build to there, and don't exactly quote me on that, but they've had, during that build, we've had 476 locals employed. The number might be slightly different than that, that's the top of my head, and we actually have very significant local benefit. And so the contractor, or the joint venture contractors, they exceeded their targets. So we actually look contractually, poor performance gets punished, good performance gets rewarded in contractual terms.
And so when you're looking at your tendering process,
yep,
how much value do you put on the local content? So if you've got hypothetically a contractor is 30% more expensive but has nearly triple the local content, aiming for a 30% target,
yep,
is that the sort of margin you can fall into, or is it sort of like the price is actually its own separate balancing factor, and if all things being equal and you've got local content, you'll get an edge?
How we actually bid the job, and this goes for whether it's a relatively small package like this or some of the really, really large packages, we actually have the bid evaluation team. There's a number of tiers, so you start out with that. The first group who do the heavy lifting, do all the evaluation, we don't actually show them the price. Everyone immediately wants to go to see the price, but we actually preclude that. And while we do that, we actually get them to evaluate it on its own rights, on its own merits, things like social content. They'll then score it, and then price gets brought into it. And I'm not to say price doesn't count. It's clear price has to play a role, and then we weight them all. But so local content is a core requirement of what we've been told we have to deliver on. And in Parks and Narromine, if we come here again, we can actually probably give a more detailed description. The contractor delivered it in spades. They did a great job. And we actually monitor very closely, monitor their performance.
Thank you, that's all the questions I've got on that.
Thanks very much. Mr Mayor, Councillor Power.
Yeah, my question is in relation to local authority densities. Is there another area of rail, this route, is it going through an area as dense as Logan, as far as density housing is concerned?
Yes. Coming out of Melbourne, this comes from Melbourne and it goes through some dense areas of Melbourne. In saying that, I should qualify it in that it's on the northeastern line that has a lot of existing traffic, much more traffic than the existing train line through here does. So it does actually go through other dense areas, put aside from local through, say, Gatton or towns, relatively small.
And in relation to the vibration issue, it clearly states here you've got double stacked freight trains running at 80 to 100 kilometres an hour. We, as local authority, we often get residents complaining about their houses moving as far as the structures are concerned. Obviously, these trains are travelling very fast, very heavy. What precautions are you going to take as far as the track is concerned to remove the vibration issue?
I think probably Karen, who spent 15 years in the UK doing brownfield construction in very dense population, like London, was based in London, so is probably the best position to answer that.
So what we can tell you so far is that we've undertaken baseline vibration monitoring. So first part of the process is to assess the existing condition, and that's just being completed, and we're just receiving reports in the coming month on what that currently means. And yes, we have talked to members of your community who have raised some concerns. That information will be processed by our service providers, and then they'll make recommendations based on modelling of future operations of how we might mitigate those impacts. At the moment, I can't give you a definitive answer on the kinds of mitigations that we're proposing to employ, because it is a process that takes a year or more to work through, but it's definitely on our radar, and by the end of this year, early next year, we hope to be coming to the community to talk about what those mitigations could be.
And as far as aesthetics are concerned, how are you going to improve the aesthetics? I mean, let's be honest, there's going to be a huge increase in trains coming through. The aesthetics, this is going through a residential part of Logan. How do we obviously propose to improve the look of that area?
So again, a landscape and visual impact assessment is part of the range of investigations that we're doing at the moment. So as you're probably aware, we propose to undertake a full range of investigations that's commensurate with an environmental impact statement, which we have applied to the coordinator to do. Again, that information is due back to us in the next 3 months or so for assessment, and then we'll have to apply mitigations.
And sound walls, is that going to be the whole route through residential and what I consider to be park residential areas?
Yep, so noise obviously has the same process. We've already undertaken a range of baseline noise monitoring, so that was across 20 different properties, ranging in periods of time from 1 week to attended monitoring overnight. Baseline information is being processed at the moment to understand the current noise levels. There'll be operational modelling that's due to commence in the next month, and then we understand what that impact is based on the current guidelines for noise and what assessment we might need to, what treatment we might need to apply, and that depends on the receptor and the level of exceedance. So noise walls are a potential kind of mitigation. There's other kinds of mitigations, potentially at receptors, that can be more effective, some at the source that might be equally as effective.
And given that this is a developing area of Logan, is there going to be a fund set up that council can acquire funding from the federal government if there is infrastructure needs to address in the future? Because this is a developing area. We have road networks going through there. I know you're addressing the existing infrastructure there. We are a growing city, growing very rapidly actually, and my concern as a mayor is that you put this railway network through there, it's going to reduce the ability to address our road networks in the future, and there could be impending costs particularly in engineering, it's very expensive to find, obviously, engineering outcomes. Is there going to be a pot of money there that we can acquire funding for in the future if we have to build in and around your railway network? Because we may need other roads to go through there.
I think the way to address it is we don't simply have some pot of money. Our brief is to build this. The government provided us the money, and our brief is to build it, like the alignment. We've been given the alignment. In saying that, in discussions of which officers from Logan Council participate, with a number of other councils meet about bi-monthly or 3-monthly, and one of the big topics is the whole, what is the planning horizon? And some councils say, we've got a plan, our planning horizon's 100 years, and we might have, in 100 years' time, there might be a suburb here or there might be this. Therefore, your infrastructure should take that into account. Ultimately, it comes down to a discussion at individual councils of, here is concrete plan, or we're going to have X, Y or Z here. Your railway line's going to impact that, what you're planning to do. That's, I think, the big difference, though, here is that I think it's twofold. One, the railway line exists, so the actual existing line's not changing in any form, but it goes to more to your point about will the road network change in response to traffic movement.
Well, in Victoria...
It's not about the train line itself won't change, it's been here, it's already here.
Yeah, but realistically, the situation in Victoria changed considerably where there was future development, and local authorities and state government had to change around those railway networks. It cost them hundreds of millions of dollars to do so. I know in Bronia, because of the traffic situation, they had to the state government had to inject huge amounts of funding in there to actually make it more viable for the residents for the traffic. It's just horrendous.
Yeah, I agree.
And they did a whole package of these right across the state, and I would imagine it cost billions of dollars to actually move Victoria into the future because of the railway network. Now, I know that there's existing rail, but you know the problem is that you're running 45 trains, 1.8 kilometres long. That's going to impost on our waiting times in some of these areas. Like, this is a huge impost that you're putting on residents in that area about using that network. So you're increasing the network dramatically, and you know we may need to change the road network in that area, and basically it's going to be impossible for us to address unless there's an underpass or an overpass in that area.
Yeah, I think the point is what you made. The traffic network can be impacted, whether it be from a terminal and the growth of terminals like Brommelton or wherever, for that matter, Acacia Ridge. The rail network is already here. It's about understanding what the traffic impacts in terms of your or council's planning horizons may be.
Well, we're growing area.
It's not easy.
We're developing area, and we need to put new roads in place. It's always going to happen, and you're going to get more congestion in that area, and there's going to be need to address those road networks. It's possibly going to have to be more overpass or underpasses in the future, and there's no guarantee there'll be a pot of funding for us.
Yeah, that's why I think it's important that in discussions with council at officer level, we actually have a clear understanding of what those planning horizon is and what specifically the plans. It's not easy, I acknowledge that it could be the growth areas develop at times for different reasons, but it is about sitting down with council and ourselves about what is council's planning horizons, where do we see the growth really being. And this is not just here, this is all over the place.
Madam Chair, I'll let someone else ask questions.
Thanks very much, Mr Mayor. Councillor Jeremiah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is about compromise. Are you aware of any design changes that were made in response to community feedback? And if so, could you please describe them?
This here or elsewhere? I can talk about plenty elsewhere. Yeah.
It would be good focus locally, and then if there's none locally, elsewhere would be preferable.
Yep. Karen can talk.
Yep, so I think it's important to explain where we are in the design process at the moment. So we're in reference design phase. So what we're trying to do at the moment is confirm positions of crossing loops, for example. We'll do things like assess potential impacts. We'll assess level crossings, that sort of community interface point with the railway. At the moment, we're what we would say about 50% of the way through that process. So we actually haven't until now had enough information in order to talk to the community about what those impacts might be and therefore have the opportunity to change them. One point that we have come into play with the community with is the location of a particular crossing loop, and we understand that it causes some concern for the community. So we have undertaken to go away and do some due diligence on the location of that crossing loop. So there's a range of factors that are taken into account when we determine where that loop goes, and they can be operational, environmental, community concerns are one of those. So we've undertaken an extra piece of work to confirm that that location is optimal for operations and for reducing community impacts. That piece of work's ongoing. We'll come back to the community to talk about that towards the end of this year. This particular section of Inland Rail, I should say, is running probably 12 months behind a number of the other projects, so Rob probably has greater context on the responses that other projects have had to community concerns.
And what is that location?
We call it the Pincer Loop. It's actually located near Flagstone.
Correction, the Pincer Loop's at the back of Boronia Heights.
Sorry, my apologies, Hillcrest, Boronia Heights, yep, apologies.
And could we please get an example from another area that's a bit later on in the process?
Yeah, say on the Darling Downs, out of Brookstead, which is basically Brookstead's a railhead for grain corp silos and obviously large agricultural area. There we'd had a design. We had to keep access open to the grain silo as well as the loop. We went to the small community, talked to them. We had a design. We went through the design with them. They came back. What about this idea? In the end, it was a compromise. We found a way. It wasn't exactly what they wanted. It wasn't exactly what we wanted from an optimum design, but we shifted the line slightly one way over a couple of kilometres, and it was actually a good example. I can give numerous examples where we actually take community feedback because we don't actually know it all. You know, the whole design process is iterative. We actually, whilst we do lots of engineering and surveys, end of the day, people tell us, do you know how this actually works here on the ground? So there's numerous examples. The Brookstead was very good. A small community impacted. We actually shifted things around, so we come up with a compromise, which was your opening words, which is a good way to look at it.
Great, thank you. No further questions.
Thanks, Councillor Hiremeier. Councillor Bradley.
Thank you. My questions, I suppose, are following on from previous questions. Has the process gone too far for the route to be changed, is my first question. We're the delivery vehicle, in a sense. We'll ultimately be the owner of the asset, but ARTC was given the alignment by the federal government and we're delivering on the alignment they gave us. Right. But has the process gone too far for the route to be changed?
That's not a question for me to answer, it's a question to take up with the federal government.
But it could theoretically be changed?
No, I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is we were given the alignment and our job is to deliver against that on time and budget.
But I understand that you don't want to answer that directly. What would you propose as compensation for impacted City of Logan residents?
In terms of compensation, could you please elaborate on your question?
There was mitigation measures.
Probably important as well on the previous question. It wasn't that I don't want to answer the question. I answered the question by saying we were given the alignment. We are the delivery vehicle.
I understand that.
Correct.
I understand that, but theoretically it could be changed. And I understand you don't want to answer that. But what sort of compensation could impacted residents receive?
What, in terms of monetary compensation or?
No, going through the process, what type of compensation could residents in the City of Logan receive with this going forward?
I'm not clear of the question. In terms of impacts, if we were to impact, we have to put in mitigation measures. We had a number of questions from there.
Just can you give examples, please?
So I think we had some good examples earlier. Say we actually define where we're going to have a noise impact. A specific resident, we've proven it's intolerable impact. We'll look at mitigation measures such as a noise wall. Say there's visual impacts, we'll look at opportunities to reduce those. In terms of compensation, given it's a brownfield corridor, we're not actually resuming land. If we were to resume someone's land or part of it, they clearly get compensated for it. If we were to cut someone's access off, we clearly have to reinstate access. But in terms of providing someone a monetary compensation where they're not impacted.
So really, the level of compensation or mitigation would be to just the noise is the main thing, or what else? What other things?
Well, we saw, I think your Mayor gave some wonderful examples on vibration as an example.
Yep.
Does vibration, does it actually affect the structural integrity of someone's house? The noise is obvious and very simple. It's not simple to deal with, but it's simple to understand. Visual impacts, they're the type of things.
Okay. And I understand that you were saying you're doing the baseline sort of analysis at the moment. I understand that. But I just know from my personal experience, when I don't live there at the moment, but when I lived in Springwood, I could hear the trains which were down Logan Central sort of way, and that's many kilometres away. So in your analysis, do you take that into consideration, the longer distance of impacts?
I think Karen could probably answer it better, and I'll let her answer it, but why we do a range of locations is to actually understand what the baseline conditions are like, the existing conditions. There's what noise is like now, and therefore we can predict, based on, as Karen used, operational modelling, what those impacts going forward might be.
Okay, I'll leave it at that at the moment. Thank you.
Thanks,
Chair.
Councillor Bradley. Councillor Hall.
Yeah, look, I understand you're here to do your job and tell us about this inland railway coming through, but I'm also here to do a job, and that is to be the voice of the people who live in Logan, the angry mob, so to speak. As a local independent, I really have no political bias in terms of the benefits or the not so benefits of this inland railway going through. My only bias here is to represent the people who live in Logan and their health, their needs and their welfare. And I can honestly say I cannot see any benefit for the people of Logan other than a short stint of maybe some construction work for a minority few going through. I cannot see any benefit moving forward for the residents of Logan once this thing is completed and built. I think it'll just be a very noisy train going through our fine city. And for a long time, Logan has been thought upon as just being a stopover between the Gold Coast and Brisbane. And I feel this is even worse, because this is basically something that's just going to cut through the guts of us and, be a distraction from the beautiful environment, the beautiful area that we call home. The impacts are not just to the people who live here, it's also to the wildlife that lives here. And we've got, some very rare wildlife that lives in Logan, and they're just not being represented there. I don't believe there's any way you can honestly say that the impacts of this will be deserved for those that live there as well. All I can say in quiet honesty is I've got a really bad feeling about this.
There's no question attached to that, Councillor Hall. It's just your statement.
Well, I would honestly like to know, apart from the period of while it's being constructed, what benefit does this really have to the average resident of Logan, apart from being something that we will have to stop for the rest of our lives while we're travelling to work or travelling to school?
As I said earlier, put aside the construction phase, long term it's what Australians in general benefit from. I know it's an answer you don't want to hear, but the benefit will be they'll have access, or they'll have the benefit of a much more efficient supply chain.
I would just like to say my position on this inland railway is I'm strongly against it going through Logan.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Councillor Wilcox, do you have a question?
Madam Chair. So I just wanted to start off with the supply chain. My husband works for probably one of the biggest supply chains in Brisbane. They have to put their stuff on trucks and they are in the back of Heathwood and they're at Parkinson. Now, it either has to go to Acacia Ridge or Bromelton. There's no stops in between for them to load their trucks. So their trucks are still on the road. They're still going somewhere. Yes, I agree. I think it's great that it's going to make it quicker, especially for them getting their stuff all over the state. Great. But there's still no, apart from the businesses, for the residents of Logan, there's no benefit. And I know you've already said it, so I won't harp on it and I won't ask you to make a comment on it again. Going back to the construction, what construction's going to happen in Logan? Because I've lived in Logan for 16 years. I lived through the Greenbank doubling of the track about 10 years ago. There's already a dual gauge track there. You can see that quite clearly. So what construction are they going to do? Why are they lowering the tracks when the tracks are already there? The bridges and the crossings are the ones that need fixing. Why not help fund the upgrading of the bridges and the road network rather than spending all that money to pull those tracks out, redo it again, because you love the photo of the Greenbank roundabout with the bridge. For some reason it's on absolutely everything. And I drive that twice a day, every day.
Did you have those questions?
So what I'm taking your question is what actual construction activities is going to take place.
Mm-hmm.
And so Karen can tell you, as a construction specialist, exactly how that works.
So within the Logan area, yes, we do have track lowerings proposed under existing road over rail bridges. We are lowering that track so that we can fit a train underneath the bridge that takes 2 containers stacked. We're also installing new and extending the crossing loops. You're correct, there is a dual gauge facility between Kangaroo and Bromelton. That what we call the narrow gauge rail of that dual gauge is not commissioned at the moment. So it will join into the rest of the network within Queensland to create a Queensland dual gauge network. This particular project has been scoped as an enhancement project. So that means it doesn't look at what would be a vastly different scope of replacing a road over rail bridge. We're using the existing network in order to minimise those kinds of impacts and lowering the track under those bridges. Does that talk to some of what you're asking? Sorry.
It does, but those bridges desperately need upgrading. I have 3 trunk roads in and out of my division, which is the one that is mostly affected by this coming through. And hey, my bridges, they desperately need upgrading. That bridge has been there for years. Surely upgrading a bridge would be a cheaper option than lowering the tracks.
I think I can talk to this, sorry. Well, we have actually undertaken that assessment. To lower the track under the bridge, we're lowering them a range of up to 1.2 metres. You're talking in the order of $1 to $2 million to do that piece of work. We've actually done some high-level estimates on replacing the bridges in your area, and it's tens of millions. So when we consider in the bigger context the kinds of future growth in the area and future projects, part of what we're trying to do is limit that impact and make sure that we don't unnecessarily spend money on the railway that might then be forfeited at a later date. So the project that is scoped and approved under the business case is an enhancement, and that's currently what's within our remit to work within the rail corridor. Once we talk about bridges, we're outside the rail corridor, and it's a much different question.
Again, it's not an enhancement to Logan though. Sorry, that's just a comment. Constructing the new loops. So at the moment we've got the passing loop at Greenbank. You also then have another passing loop that'll go through Timms, which is projected to be at the back of Boronia Heights Hillcrest, which you're calling it Larapinta, which for me is extremely deceiving for the residents because you're calling it Larapinta. So Larapinta is an industrial area. Lara Pinter doesn't run through our area. We have Baronia Heights and Hillcrest, which is where you're proposing to do the loop, which is where the trains will be idling. You're proposing 1.8k trains. Why can you not move that loop, put it through the back of the Federal Reserve, which is the Army Reserve? I'm sure they would have land. Why can you not double the loop through there and butt it onto the already existing Greenbank loop?
So we'd be talking about working outside the corridor, is that your question?
No, it's still
within the corridor but moving it north or south?
Moving it south.
So as I mentioned before, we're well aware that that particular loop causes concern for the community, and we are undertaking a due diligence exercise to make sure that it's positioned in the right location for operations, but equally in a location that's going to minimise impacts for the community if we can. So that piece of work is ongoing. We have taken that particular piece of feedback on board. With respect to the name, yes, that's been raised by the community as a concern. The intent is not to deceive the community in terms of giving it a particular name. It's a railway convention. At the moment, that's what it's called. We're attempting in all our public facing information to ensure that we clarify what that means by putting the actual location.
So to minimise the residents that we have with their concerns, it would be to move it into the Army Reserve.
Yep, but in order to do that, we need to go through a range of operational modelling and studies to determine if that is possible and if we can still deliver our service offering by doing that.
The same with the Kagaru loop, because at the moment it sits at the back of Flagstone, right on the back of residents down near Pastoral Court, Bushman Drive, down the back there. You call it Kagaru, it sits at the back of Flagstone, Kagaru is further out. Push it out to Kagaru, make it a Kagaru loop. There's very limited houses, there's very limited residents out there. Why can we not push it out there?
Yes. So again, same process. We need to do due diligence on its position. It's not a matter of simply moving it. We need to have minimum distances between loops. We need to accommodate things like grades to make sure that the loop itself still works, and that process takes time to determine.
In regards to Melbourne, you said that there's a northeastern line in the back of Melbourne where the trains come out. Do you have a percentage of how much residential or built-up areas that the train runs through compared to us here in Logan?
I don't. We can certainly get it.
I think it'd be good to know just how much it affects the other states, because when you look at, I don't have it with me, you had consultation and feedback and that sort of thing. When you look at the amount that Queensland's provided compared to the other states, primarily one would think that's because of how many people this is affecting in Queensland, and it's not affecting as many down in New South Wales and Victoria.
So was the question, what's been provided, a lot more up here. I think in terms of consultation, I think we put in an equal measure of consultation right across the alignment. It's irrespective of whether it's a small community or a very large community like Logan or Melbourne. We don't have different levels of consultation.
I have no doubt that the consultation's the same. I just feel that you would be getting more feedback from Queensland because it is affecting more residents here than what it is down south.
I can't specifically comment from experience in Melbourne, but I do know from some of my colleagues, right along the alignment we get quite a lot of feedback. Yeah, I can't say whether it's more or less, but I don't think we measure it that way. This gets more up here because it's more dense.
It would be good to know the percentages of how much that's really affecting the other states and the other residents.
Yeah, I think, as I said, we can look into what's the percentage of urban environment in Melbourne it traverses. That's the question.
Why is there a tunnel being built at the back of Teviot Brook?
The Teviot Range?
Yeah, why is there a...
Long can answer that.
Thank you. Largely it's just the terrain through there. It is very hilly terrain through there, and as I guess the engineering of alignments and railways go, that they generally have to be reasonably flat. And whilst it is on a grade, the terrain through there warrants a tunnel to go through to ensure that we can go through that range.
Is there an existing line already there?
No, it's a greenfield site through Calvert to Kangaroo section.
Okay, so that one's not there already. Tim, you got anything up? Because I'm just going to jump around.
So we've got Councillor Raven next.
I'm happy to let the other divisional councillors impacted go.
Thank you very much. Councillor Fraser, you had questions?
All right, so I've got a few questions, and yeah, this rail line does actually go from top to bottom through my division, so it is quite a big project that will impact my division and my constituents in a very, very big way. So you mentioned that there will be a cost benefit to the community, so after everything's built, you said all goods and things like that are going to be a bit cheaper. What kind of goods will be going up and down the rail line that would fit that description, that would make things cheaper for us?
Say, for example, and it's ultimately, I'm making the assumption that the supply chain is more efficient and some of that's passed on to the consumer. That's the... I think, and it's probably a reasonable... It is actually a reasonable assumption, but at the end of the day... What it is. The sort of goods that you see, things like Coca-Cola, alcohol, toilet paper. This is a lot of this. When we talk about intercity freight, that's what we mean. When you actually go out and look at, say, at Bromelton, where SCT have a terminal, you actually see the sort of things that are moved on trains. Yeah, it's lots and lots of perishables, also things, manufactured goods. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because
the thing is, we have a Coke factory in Richlands here, so that's obviously going to go by road. But
not necessarily. And why I can speak to that is I've got a daughter who's a chemical engineer for Coca-Cola, which is now a mother. What I can see truly happening and what her role was with Coca-Cola in the latter years, she'd actually design and build bottling plants, because Coca-Cola make many, many things. I don't know exactly what Richland makes, to be honest, but they don't necessarily... They make products in one place and they move them around the country. I think you'll begin to see in Australia, you'll begin to see manufacturing itself, and by manufacturing I mean in its broadest terms, to include Coca-Cola, you'll begin to see how they'll change, because they'll have a very efficient and very reliable supply chain. Richlands, for example, may be expanded at the expense of somewhere else. Now, I don't want to start any rumours on that.
You just did.
It has actually. They did invest a lot of money recently.
I do know their Queensland operation. I always thought it was at somewhere out Oxley, but I take it's Richland. I agree with you. That's Coca-Cola's biggest plant in Australia, and you could see long-term thinking. This actually could become very important, but it's that sort of thing. Like I know, for example, they produce a lot of Foster's on the Gold Coast. A lot of their products are produced here and shipped elsewhere. I only know that because during her time at university, she worked there. Yeah. So it'll change. I think it'll change manufacturing in Australia long term because they've got a secure supply chain.
So just to interrupt on that, so are you proposing that there may be more stops on the inland rail track so that manufacturing can take advantage of that? And would Logan be one of those stops? It's ultimately the market will respond. We'll provide... we're building a line and we run those tracks. And if someone actually was to say, I'm going to build a terminal in somewhere, and they can put up a business case and they actually can make it stack up and they can secure a train path, yes. And one of the things, say the Darling Downs, for example, we're now beginning to see... No one believed inland rail was happening. We're now beginning to see that, of course it is happening, but in lots of people, the market's responding to it. For example, Wellcamp Industrial Precinct is developed. Pacific National and Wagner's have recently announced they're looking to build a big intermodal facility there. That is the market responding to a piece of infrastructure.
Okay. So would we expect to see lots of dangerous goods, for instance, fuels or chemicals to be going up and down this proposed line through Logan in particular?
I think one of the things that, because it has to traverse a tunnel down the Toowoomba Range, 6.4 kilometre tunnels, that will certainly go to addressing some of those issues. But I can't going forward sit here hand on heart and say it won't have X, Y and Z. But dangerous goods, if they were to be transported, they'd be transported in accordance with existing or future legislation, just like they are now.
Yeah, because I know that rail travel is quite safe, but my concern is like derailment in particular. You see that around the world quite often, even passenger trains, they derail. What does cause derailment, and what would the risk be on this particular line in Logan, do you know? Or
I don't know the answer to that. I know rail derailments are something that we focus on as an organisation because we deal with them not on a daily basis but a far too frequent basis. We deal with them and we work closely with not just the regulators but also the actual train owners. We don't operate trains, we control the network. It's something front and centre of our organisation's mind for all those reasons you mean.
Yeah, because if there was DG going up and down through my division, for instance, and something was to derail, that would be a rather big concern for people, wouldn't it? So,
as I said, we focus, it is front and centre of our organisation's mind. We
okay.
deal with it,
yeah.
not daily, but far too frequently, sadly.
Yeah. I've got more, but do you want to say anything, Teresa, or no? All right. So alternate routes, so we have discussed this before, but was there any serious consideration given for the route to go, where are we, from Gundawindi up to, say, Gladstone direction? Because I know that there is a coal mine around Mara, and there should probably be a line that could then go over to Gladstone. Has that been considered seriously? And if it was, why does it seem to not be an option really for now?
As I said earlier, I know it's an answer that your colleague didn't like to hear, but we were given the alignment, and the alignment was chosen after many studies over many years. We were given that, and our job is to deliver that. But importantly, it goes back to that slide, that pie chart. This is largely 65 to 70% intercity freight. Export it is part of the mix, but it's largely about intercity freight. Yeah. And so that's why Melbourne to Brisbane, or Perth, Melbourne, Adelaide, same thing. Yeah.
Okay. So we've got a lot of concerns about noise, vibration, dust, and that. A question was asked about compensation, but have you got a specific list of things apart from noise mitigation, like barriers and stuff like that, that you're willing to actually provide for residents? So things like double or triple glazed glass, stuff like that. Has that been considered at all?
It's all dependent on, it's very site specific or case specific. If someone's been impacted, and I think double glazed glass is a good example, that may be a mitigation measure in absence of a noise wall. And these are all weighed up. Once we determine the impacts, we just understand the baseline, then we determine the future impacts on the environment and on residents, in particular receptors, we call it.
Yeah. So also with noise mitigation, a lot of it is subjective. Like I'm a light sleeper. I used to live near a rail line. I'd hear the trucks going up, or the trains going up and down the line where I used to live, and that would annoy me. So just because you've done a noise study in a certain area and you've determined that they don't really need any noise mitigation, would that still be available to residents if they truly put their hand on their heart and say, hey, I think this is going to impact me, or this is impacting me? Would there be scope for them to receive any help in that way?
There'd be scope for it to be looked at, but ultimately it's got to be quantified, and there's ultimately got to be some point reached where this is what the requirements are, or above or below those requirements. You've got to draw the line in the sand somewhere, which it's not a nice thing to hear, but that's the reality.
Yeah, fair enough.
Sorry, can I just add to that? When Rob is explaining that, it's not just us setting those requirements. So actually the state government tells us here's a certain level which you need to adhere to. So when the designers are looking at the modelling and what they need to do, it is based on state regulation. It's not us kind of picking and choosing what we want to do.
Yeah, fair enough. And
Councillor Fraser?
one more question. So that tunnel that was spoken of, how much will that cost?
The tunnel up the Toowoomba Range.
Yeah, because I know that the under-city tunnels are not cheap, and this one would be of similar size, I'd imagine.
This is 6.4 kilometres, and to give you a feel for the scale, most of you would probably be aware of Legacy Way. Legacy Way, it's two tunnels, right, but one tunnel's about 14.4 metres diameter, so that's its diameter. This here is about 12.2. So it's kind of like Legacy Way, but at half the length again. So it's a big tunnel and costs a lot of money. What the capital there, that part of the project is going to be built through a public-private partnership. That means, so we're getting the market's going to come in, they'll fund it broadly, we'll have to fund some of it, and then we'll pay them back over a long period of time. Which is very typical how infrastructure gets built, some parts of infrastructure. Why I'm giving you the context of that is, clearly this is the information on the estimates are so market sensitive because people are going to bid the job. We're not actually in the business of telling the market what our estimates actually are. Nonetheless, you're right, it is a very significant capital item, and per track length, that is the most expensive part of the whole build. If you like per metre a track, that tunnel down the range, for the reasons, I think we can work it out, that's the reason. Ironically, the other section of track that's the second most expensive build is the section as you cross from Gundawindi going across into New South Wales. Relatively flat country, but it's because you're crossing a major floodplain.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so you've got a lot of bridges, basically, a lot of bridge structure, and it's all new.
Yeah, thanks, that'll do for now.
Thanks very much. So I've got Councillor Avon, then Mr Mayor.
Thank you.
Councillor Moransky. Yeah.
I've got a couple of questions. You've identified funding risk a couple of times while you're talking.
Was that flooding risk?
Funding risk.
Funding risk?
Yeah, you referred to it that there's a lot of cash flow and you've got to tap into investors and into your PPP.
Yep.
So is this something that realistically, if the market decided it wasn't something you wanted to invest in, it could stop?
I think the important thing here, I think there's $9.3 billion was allocated. So the project for 10 of the 13 sections is fully funded. 3 of those sections is from the public-private partnership. It's going to be a combination of the market together with ourselves because we have to put some money in. To do that, it's a question, will the market respond? We've actually got 3 consortiums that have been shortlisted to bid the job. Now, I can't go into the details, but it's so commercially sensitive. The appetite for this project is significant. It's very, very significant. Part of the reason the appetite in the market is so significant because it's funded. It's a fully funded project, which is very rare. So it's a very good question, because private infrastructure projects will often, you come up with a great idea, build in a major resource project, great idea, but if you can't raise the money in the market, it doesn't matter.
Thank you. Something else that I was concerned about is you said that derailments are frequent.
Sadly, derailments happen worldwide and they happen in Australia. We actually had one on the network last week in the Hunter Valley. We actually had a loco derailed, or 2 locos actually. Now, because we run the network, Hunter Valley network, they're derailed.
So, and forgive me because I don't know much about trains, but if you've got a 1.8 kilometre train going 100 kilometres an hour and it comes off the tracks, that's going to cause heinous amounts of damage to the properties nearby.
Generally, I don't like to speculate on that, and I don't want to raise any suggestion out there that we've said there's going to be Inland Rail's going to have derailments. Clearly, we don't build to that. When derailments, in saying that, when derailments occur, you generally don't have 1.8 kilometre track. You'll have a loco come off, and they come off and fall over. Now, in saying, I also don't want to discount that it's something we don't take seriously. It is something we take very, very seriously. And manage in collaboration with our state regulators and federal safety regulators, as well as the actual train operators. Part of Inland Rail is to be a very modern network, and that in itself has enormous benefits for that from a safety perspective. But I don't want anyone to go away to say ARTC operates an unsafe network. It is not the case, and I'm making it very clear that is. I don't want to have that feedback because it's incorrect.
I'm not suggesting that you operate an unsafe network, and obviously you're designed to minimise risk wherever possible, but if train derailments are frequent and you're running train tracks through the most populated areas of our city, there is a risk that people could get killed by your trains coming off the tracks.
There's always a risk, but I would see it as very low. And I think it'd be inappropriate, highly inappropriate to suggest that Inland Rail is going to be killing a lot of people. I'd be very disappointed if I read that.
To be honest, I don't really care if it kills a lot of people.
One is too many. Absolutely.
Because
this is why we take this so seriously. Our safety, it is not just a core value. This is something that we live and manage every day.
I appreciate that, but like I represent my community, and there is a real risk that with 40 trains a day, 45 trains a day, going through, like when you increase frequency, you increase exposure to risk. I used to do asbestos removal, so I know that.
I absolutely and categorically deny that there's a major risk that we're going to have train derailments.
I didn't say
on
major
the inland
risk.
rail
Will the risk
in this area or
increase?
any other area.
Will the risk increase because you've got 45 train movements a day instead of 8?
I'm not going to sit here and debate with you that risk.
It's
I
not a debate, it's a
categorically
question.
say that it's
Will the risk go
inappropriate
up?
to suggest that inland rail is going to have train derailments.
I'm not saying it's going, well, you said they happen frequently. I'm not saying you're planning for them. I'm not saying that you're neglecting your duties. I completely accept that you're going to try to minimise them as best as possible. But by increasing the number of train movements to 45 from 8, will that risk increase?
I can't sit here and say yes or no. I'm not going to sit here. As I said, I'm not going to debate this with you. It's inappropriate to imply what you're implying.
I'm not implying anything. I'm asking you a question and you're avoiding it.
I think that in this instance, Councillor Raven, he has answered what he can answer.
I've got one more question, but it's a slightly less controversial one.
Yes, you can't always answer a question that is a proposition. So.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So earlier, and it might be a question for Amanda, because she mentioned it, you were talking about changes in the floodplain. Are you planning that the floodplain will worsen afterwards? Like, are you going to impact it negatively?
I'm actually in the Calvert to Kangaroo part of the project, but that's okay. Sometimes we actually minimise the amount of flooding on people's properties, and we let them know that as well. Any form of change, whether it's 10 mils, we talk to them about it, because some people have an expectation to get that water for grass, for cattle, etc. So if we're going to make any impact, we let people know.
So are we expecting a worsening of the floodplain through the sections in Logan? Maybe it's a question.
No, we're not. There's an existing railway, so as an enhancement project under an existing railway, we'll design to ensure that we don't make it worse. I know a particular concern in your area is the Oxley Creek catchment. So, for example, where we're lowering the track, it's about ensuring that we design drainage and runoff so that it doesn't create a worse situation. So no, we're not expecting any worse situation. We're undertaking flood modelling throughout this phase to ensure that that's the case.
Thank you.
Thanks. Mr Mayor.
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick question in regard to the Community Consultative Committee. I did read somewhere where you were excluding representatives of council. Can we be on that Community Consultative group, and can we have engage a professional person as well to be on that committee?
So in regards to your first point, there was a determination in the Charter across all the Queensland committees that elected representatives wouldn't be able to be members of the committee. That doesn't preclude council officers. Indeed, on our K2ARB committee, there is a council officer from Scenic Rim Council who is a member of that committee. It just relates to elected representatives. And then your second point was around a professional person?
A professional person that we can engage with to obviously protect council's interests.
We can certainly discuss. The committee, they do 2-year terms, so the committee at the moment is set until the end of this year. We can certainly discuss membership at that point. However, they do need to be representatives of their community. That's been our main concern.
Obviously, there'd be a concern in our community that a lot of information could be distributed to people that are probably aren't educated or able to cope with the rationale that's put to you in regards to the overall outcomes. And I don't believe there's any bigger player in the community than the council. So, and we have got huge concerns, and a lot of the questions that have been raised today haven't really been clearly answered. And obviously you've got investigative work continuing, that's fine, but we would obviously want to represent our residents in the best way forward, and I would suggest that the ability for us to employ someone who has the knowledge and the experience to represent the public and the council in what happens in the future.
This not the first time this has come up on a number of councils, and how we've actually addressed it. Various councils have asked, can you fund X to get a water study done or air study done? Can they basically, someone separate to ourselves or our advisors, the council directly engage a specialist or specialists, and we're absolutely open to that. So if you ask, we'd like to get consultants X, Y and Z, and would we pay the bill? The answer will be yes, obviously within.
So you're open to that idea?
Absolutely, and we've done it in many other councils.
Okay.
And from memory, the council officers of sort of Queensland and Northern New South Wales that meet regular, I thought it had been discussed there from memory. But yes, if the council was to write to us to say we'd like to get some independent advice, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And just specify what it is.
I mean, I think the community would be interested in, obviously, the council getting involved with it to protect their interests. Because at the moment, and I agree with some of the councillors here, there's no particular outcome for us other than the promise of maybe some trickle-down economics. And really, we're very suspicious of the way forward. We know that we're going to incur a lot of inconvenience. We're going to incur probably a lot of expense in future times. And, you know, the noise, the aesthetics, and all the other issues, air quality, it's a serious issue for us. And I'll be honest, and I take the administrator's letter that was sent while this council had no representation. To me, it was a little bit soft. Certainly if the elected members were in place, I think the letter would have been a resounding no. We don't want this, and because the implications are going to be very severe, and we want a large amount of compensation for future possibilities. So I think as a council going forward, we will have to discuss this at a further time, how we can obviously overcome the issues that we're seeing today, that not being addressed, but make sure that our residents and our city and the reputation of our city is protected. Because I think a lot of the representatives here are sick of seeing this council being victims for the greater good.
As I said, we're more than happy to look at funding for, because we do recognise that some of the work we produce is complicated.
Yeah, and I also think
drain on your resources. We're willing.
Of all the councils, we're probably impacted the most with the amount of density that's involved with the rail is going through, and a lot of us can't foresee how you're going to overcome those problems, and that's why we're going to have to probably engage someone that's a very professional-minded person who will know the implications of this rail network going through one of our most densely populated parts of our city.
I think you'll have to engage a few specialists because the areas are special, whether it be noise or vibration or...
Just a quick follow-on for that. So if we engage a specialist who finds that something is, a particular way, can we seek reimbursement of that specialist costs if it's found to be correct?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Right.
Now, that's why you'll probably need a range. There's no one specialist. Like, we don't use one specialist either. But you actually ask if we reimburse it, and we put a framework around it. Yep. So you just can't come back and say, here's the bill. But yeah, and we don't actually, we can suggest people, we don't actually get involved in that. It's between you and your advisors.
No worries. Councillor Karansky.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, I'd just like to thank you for indulging me to ask one other question. I realise this debate's gone on for a while, so I'll try and be brief. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you to you guys for coming in here today and for allowing the public to listen in on this conversation. I greatly appreciate that you've done that. We've certainly had other delegations who weren't prepared to do that, so thank you. You raised the resident concerns earlier, primarily were around noise, air quality, property values and traffic movements, and you've talked somewhat about mitigation and how you're working through that process at the moment. I was a former councillor with the former a group of councillors who had a great deal of concern around coal trains running through Logan. And as the Mayor rightly said, it's been a little while since we've reconnected. We've been away while we've been in administration. So I wonder if you could make comment around the coal train concerns and currently where that issue sits.
I think coal trains aren't precluded from running on this line. I think the intergovernmental agreement that was between the state and ARTC, and what it was, and I think it's been reported in the press, that coal trains won't be run until you commence the construction of the project, the Salisbury to Bow Desert line, passenger line, or at another agreed time. And that's where it sits.
Sorry, I didn't understand that. Could you put that in plain English for me?
So there's an agreement between the Queensland State and ARTC on Inland Rail. That was signed late December last year. And in that, it's called that intergovernmental agreement, or it's often just referred to as the IGA. That actually says that coal can't run on this line until the commencement of the construction of the Salisbury to Bow Desert line or another agreed time. Now, don't quote me the exact words, but that's the message.
So
it's
in other words, in the short term...
saying coal won't be run on this line.
No, in the short term we won't see coal running on the line, but there is potential that coal may run on this line in the fullness of time, yeah?
Correct, coal could run at some point in time.
That's certainly one of the major concerns that residents
We absolutely hear that loud and clear, not just from yourself, but we have not missed that message.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bannon.
This question is probably for the lady. Sorry, I forgot your name, sitting there.
The lady.
Karen?
Yeah.
Karen.
With your EIS and the noise studies and stuff, so when obviously the vehicle movements, the train movements are going to increase, we're not going to have 45 train movements straight away. When you put your infrastructure in for that, do you put that at full capacity, or do you put it to accommodate for the 45 train movements? Is that how you work out with your infrastructure?
The rail infrastructure, sorry?
Yeah, so your noise barriers and all the precautions that you'll take, for the noise, for the dust, for vibration, does that get set at the full rate?
Yeah, we model it typical and peak capacity.
Yep. So when we do that first modelling, you'll put that towards modelling for the dramas of when the coal eventually comes through. You'll have that set from the word go, so you won't have to improve that infrastructure as you're going?
No, so depends how and when we employ the mitigations as well. So in the construction, there's some nuances about how you would need to construct a noise wall, for example, but yes, we would model to the peak capacity, so that's what we would look to build. Yeah.
Cool, no, thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Fraser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the speed limits that will be going through Logan, would they be dissimilar to what we're experiencing now, or do you think they'd be increased or decreased for the trains to run through that area?
So they won't be increased. There's a lot of tight curves on the line that go through Logan area, and the speed limit will also depend on the train. So a double stack train taking a tight curve could be different to a single stack train, but so it wouldn't be more than what's currently on the line. I guess the point to make as well is we're not upgrading the entire line, so we're not upgrading the entire line so that it can run at a higher speed. We're only upgrading certain sections of it, so that wouldn't change the speed necessarily along the entire route.
But when I see train lines and stuff, you usually see one speed limit and that's it. So is there going to be some kind of sensor, or is the driver or whatever going to know that a double stack should or shouldn't go a certain speed? How does that work?
It depends where you are on the route, so certainly the speed will change along the alignment. Mm-hmm. This is such a short section by comparison with the rest of it. Yeah. I'd have to have a look at a line diagram to confirm how it changes through Logan, to be honest. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but it does depend where the train is in the route.
Okay, and what speeds would you typically expect trains to be doing when they're in the passing loops? Would it just be regular speed or a bit slower?
Slowing to come into a passing loop?
Yeah.
So they actually stop in the passing loop.
Yeah, so one stops and then the other goes around.
Correct.
So the one going around, how fast would that be going?
It depends where the loop is and what that section's signed at, so I couldn't tell you off the top of my head,
Okay,
sorry.
fair enough. Yeah, so yeah, there's different variables to consider in that. And one more thing, the Senate inquiry that's going on at the moment, can you comment at all about what might be the expected result of that, if it's going to affect the current alignment map or anything at all? You're not going to comment?
It's a Senate inquiry, it's beyond... We gave a submission and appeared before it. The Senate will come back sometime later this year. I think it was September.
Mm-hmm.
I think that may get pushed out because of COVID, but it's their inquiry. Yeah.
Okay.
And so they'll come back with a report.
Yeah, fair enough. Thanks. Yeah, that's it.
Councillor Wilcox, any further questions?
Yeah, got a few more. So, in regards to the train speeds and stuff, just touching on that. So 21 tonnes, is that single stacked or double? Or does it depend on what's in it?
That's the axle load. Yeah, it's not actually 21 tonnes in the box itself.
Okay.
It's axle load at the...
Because I've just got 21 tonnes at 115, 25 at 80, future-proofing 30 to 80. So I'm just wondering, how quick those double-stack trains essentially are going to be going on those big single lane stretches. Like, are they going to be going 115 k's past the houses?
I think we'd have to take on notice with a specific answer in a specific section.
Yeah, we can come back another time and take you through section by section.
Yep. And just in regards to the infrastructure, at the moment, you're only going to be allowing 1.8k trains. Now, I'm not sure how long they are at the moment, but ultimately you want 3.6k trains coming through. So...
We potentially in the future, but it's 1.8. I think existing trains are up to 1.4, I think. Yeah, I think existing trains are 1.4 kilometres.
Mm-hmm. So essentially the infrastructure will have to get changed eventually.
The loops would get longer.
If I could answer, the trains are a maximum of 1.8 kilometres. Certainly every train won't be 1.8 kilometres. It's the man of the operation, that the path that you sell. So the trains might be 900, 600, 1.2, 1.4. But the infrastructure that we're looking for is to cater for a maximum of 1.8 kilometres. And then it's understanding the demand of, obviously, national freight. At 2040 is, do we need to look at then and not preclude a future proofing for the 3.6 kilometres, which is in our current service offering.
Do we know the speed of the trains that are coming through now? Like, do you know the speed of the train that comes through at Greenbank and Newbeath at 7:45 at night? Because I can set my watch by it.
No, I don't know the answer off the top of my head.
Okay, be good to know. Just as a side remark, where you guys live, be really interested to know how close to a track you live.
It's probably...
Yeah, I don't know that that's relevant.
I don't think it's really a relevant question to ask. It sort of goes, are we empathetic, where this all leads? And I'd just like to say, this is actually, we do see engagement with the community, and groups like yourself is very important. We understand this is very difficult. We understand this has impacts. We do actually approach it as empathetically as possible. So where we live, I think it's a very loaded question.
It was, because I live 3 houses from the track. I live within the 500-metre line, and I have a really large park at the end of my street that my kids play in. I walk the dog. The trains run through there late in the afternoon. I actually had one come through quite early the other morning when I was walking the dog and scared the crap out of him. But my husband is a shift worker. He comments that he feels the vibrations. I comment that I hear the noise more than anything. We're lucky that our house does have glazing on our windows already. We do have ducted air, so we shut our house up and that sort of thing. But I do know the house that is 3 doors away from me, and I've only lived in this house for 3.5 years. It has sold, I think, 4 times since I have lived in that one house. And that is purely because of the vibrations, and the people don't know what they're getting themselves into. I can safely say when I bought my house, we did our searches on the house. we knew there was going to be a passenger line come through, but I did not know there was going to be a freight line to this extent coming through and that sort of thing. So it does worry us. We have a pool in the backyard with the droughts coming through, and I've actually just found a crack in our bathroom through my wall and that sort of thing. So yes, so I'm worried about the vibrations and what it's going to do to those pools and the houses that live that close. And I have it on a map here, and I've highlighted it if you'd like to see how close I live to the railway line. And in saying that, Mr Mayor touched on the fact that you don't allow councillors or sitting members, and I really don't understand why you don't allow sitting councillors and sitting members to sit on that CCC committee that you have at the moment. Like, I can look at the names and I can almost point where each of them live in the divisions and that sort of thing. But I don't understand why you don't let a council member or a state member sit on that committee when we represent our constituents, we represent their concerns, and we can bring it best to the table.
If I can take that one, Rob, that was actually discussed with the original CCCs, and the members of those CCC, that was sort of agreed in the interim charter that they all signed up to, that would be the case. And the reason for that was that the members and ARTC were concerned about using CCCs as a political platform. That's not to say anyone in this room would do that, but we have had the groups used, if people sort of trying to campaign through those groups. So that's why it was. Having said that, we absolutely encourage you to talk to CCC members. They can very good, I know, at the K2ARB CCC in bringing those sort of questions and concerns to the table. And finally, we're more than happy to come and see councillors whenever, through this forum or separately meeting, or I'm happy for you to all have my phone number. Like, you just...
Thank you, we'll take you up on that offer.
I'll take you up on the offer to come and have dinner at my house at 7:45, 8:45, 9:45, and you can hear the trains roaring through.
And if it's a roast lamb. Are there any other questions from councillors? Because with your permission, I would like to ask 3 questions, if I may. The first is, what are your response times for incidents on this rail line for Logan residents? And I'm saying incidents, I'm not saying derailment or anything else, but incidents on the line, and where do you have to come from? Secondly, the covering of loads and the impact on local residents. What's your response times to those and your reactions to... I know that with coal they spray it, and they say that there's very limited dust that flies off the top, but that's not always the case after it's been on a very long journey. So yeah, if you could address those 2, and then I'll ask my final, if that's okay.
The existing North Coast line, which comes into Acacia Ridge, currently that's served. What we have is we have what we call provisioning centres, which are kind of like maintenance facilities. We have them all over the country, and that one's Coffs Harbour. Going forward with Inland Rail, we haven't made a decision on where the provisioning centres will be, but there'll be additional provisioning centres built, whether it's Gatton, whether it's Brisbane.
Can I make a suggestion that if you're going through the biggest built-up area in the southeast corner through Logan, that maybe Logan, in terms of a response area, an incident area, would be a good place to locate it and maybe create some local employment in the process.
Which is why right across the alignment, for that reason, it provides local employment.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think the council should advocate.
But it's an hour and a half to get from Gatton to here in the event of an incident and a response.
I'm suggesting Logan advocates for Logan.
Absolutely, because we're the best.
Yeah.
But the covering of the loads?
The coal, which you're referring to coal.
Coal and grain, actually. Grain can just have as much impact.
We ultimately don't operate the trains, so the trains operate in accordance with their requirements. We have a state regulation, and this is for all freight, but particularly coal. In saying that, though, obviously it's an area of concern, so we'll work with the operators, but ultimately it's the train operator who's hauling it. They're using our track, but it's their wagons.
No worries. And the final question that I have for you is, you spoke about Melbourne and the lines going through there. Can you offer to us a list of complaints that have come out of Melbourne, mitigation practices that you've followed, so that we can actually go to our local residents and say, these are the options available to you. You are not helpless in the face of a line coming through our community?
I think it's a very good question. I think what we can provide is this is how elsewhere, whether it be Melbourne or Wagga or wherever else, how ARTC with its existing operations, how it actually works.
Okay.
How can a resident contact them with a concern and how that's responded to. So we can provide the existing process for our track elsewhere in the country.
Thanks very much. Just making sure there's no last minute singers. There is. Councillor Wilcox.
I've got a couple more. You were saying before that you've actually only used 20 properties for assessments along the line or something or other.
The noise.
Do you know where they are?
So this is for baseline noise monitoring. So we've undertaken a combination of longer duration noise monitoring and overnight, what we call attended monitoring, at 20 locations along the alignment at varying degrees of distance from the alignment. That gives a representative sample of the properties within the impact area. That information is used for the baseline, and then we will model throughout the alignment.
So throughout the alignment, is that Acacia Ridge to Kangaroo? Is it just 20 properties through there, or?
No, it's from Acacia Ridge to Bromilton.
Bromilton, sorry. The amount of properties that you're going to affect, I don't think 20 is enough. And I know that there would be a lot of community members that would be very happy to have whatever noise monitoring that you have. I would be happy to put it in my house, whatever you want. But I know that there would be a lot of community members that would be a bit happier with more than 20 properties being assessed.
Okay, so we can certainly have a conversation with our noise monitoring specialists. That's the process that's been set to date. A number of the properties where we have undertaken noise monitoring has been at private residences. We did offer that opportunity to the community.
Okay, I never heard it. And going back to your minutes on the 3rd of February 2020, on about page 5, you've actually got in there someone actually asked for a copy of the intergovernmental agreement. You told him to ask their local member. Now, I've actually had that question raised to me and I've gone, and I actually asked someone yesterday, do we have a copy? We don't have a copy, but local member, I'm assuming, is your state member. Can I get a copy of it?
You can certainly request it. I'm not sure what their response would be, but at ARTC, it's the federal government and the state government who are parties to that agreement, not ARTC. So we are not in a position to give it to anybody.
Another comment. Why haven't you upgraded your interactive map? It doesn't show what Logan looks like now.
So the interactive map is based on Google Maps, so it gets upgraded.
It's at least 3 years old, I can tell you that.
Yeah, it's as updated as we're able to get. So we can certainly have a look at whether there's a newer version available, but we've been asked that in the past, and that's why.
And so just another question. So once the coordinator general makes a decision, I assume that's after the Senate inquiry. Is that the final decision then? Is there no more community consult? Because reading all the comments, that's what it reads like, that once that decision's handed down, that's it.
The Coordinator General has to make the decision whether or not we'll do an environmental impact statement or whether or not we have to go through some other environmental assessments on transport and main roads. And we've applied for that and we're waiting on a decision from the Coordinator General.
Okay. And then just going back to the noise mitigation, I know that the community would be maybe a lot more open, maybe a lot more receiving, because at the moment your community engagement in the community that I hear is extremely negative. Closing of doors in meetings, not allowing public to go in. The online forum that you guys had was odd because it hasn't been posted, the questions aren't up. I got on there halfway through. When I asked a question, it was a bit like, oh, someone's already asked that question. Well, you didn't have it actually up. I couldn't read the questions. I have since got them. But if the questions were there and the answers were there, people would be able to read them and that sort of thing. Your community consultation needs a bit of tweaking. At the moment, it's in strange places. Sunnybank Hills Shopping Centre, I think, was one place for a community consultation. Put it at the Greenbank IGA, put it at the Flagstone IGA, Coles, wherever. Put it somewhere really close to the train line.
Really, any feedback on that regard would be fantastic. I guess the difficulty we had with that last round of consultation, we had much more planned, including in the Flagstone area, but obviously COVID-19 meant that we weren't able to go out and see people. So when we get the results of our environmental investigations, we'd be looking at doing that again. So I'm more than happy to take on board suggestions of where that should occur. In regards to the online session, it wasn't possible without having really a very long and in-depth script down the side, which could be quite confusing. That's why we sort of didn't leave every single question that had been asked up. But having said that, we've got a newsletter coming out shortly which will feature that information in it.
Okay. And just touching on the coal, why does the coal have to come through Brisbane if it's not already coming through Brisbane, or it's not already coming through Logan, it goes via Ipswich? Why does it have to come through Logan? Why are we amending that line? Why can it not stay where it is?
It's ultimately a decision of the coal company itself. Yeah, we have to compete for that traffic. It'd hopefully be cheaper to do it, but ultimately it's a decision. They can choose not to come on this line. Yeah.
It's interesting that I don't think that's out there in the community. They're just assuming it's coming no matter what.
I think it's a reasonable assumption that they'd go on a more efficient track, but ultimately it's ultimately the customer. Our customers are train owners who haul freight on behalf of their customers, which are, whether it be coal companies or Woolworths or whoever.
Mm-hmm. If I could just add, so in our current business case, there's, I guess, an assumption on the amount of coal that you have. So ultimately, we want an open network to attract as many operators or customers as possible to make it a successful railway, obviously for the nation in that sense. So as Rob's saying, it's the choice of the ultimately who buys the path, and if we do provide a competitive alternative, then there certainly is that opportunity to use the inland rail.
Johnson's nappies don't harm the locals in the event of an incident, quite like coal would. So that's, I think, why the questions. Councillor Hall, have you got a question?
Yes, I'd like to know what biosecurity safeguards have been put in place. We've got a nasty little cane toad problem in this area of the world, and I'd hate for the little fellas to jump on and go all the way down to Victoria. Just like to know what you have in place in terms of biosecurity measures.
So I probably can't talk to the specific detail, but certainly our intention was to produce an environmental impact statement. So we undertake full range of flora and fauna studies. We engage with local environment groups, both community and government. We're aware certainly of things like fire ant concerns. So when we come to construction time, there will be a range of biosecurity measures in place and imposed on the contractors when we're doing that work.
No other questions, councillors?
Just going back to the noise mitigation. It'd be really good if you guys could guarantee the noise mitigation. I would love to hear that you're going to put up, similar to what you see on the M1, similar to what they've just done constructing the gateway on-ramp onto Browns Plains.
The barrier.
The barriers, thank you. The noise barriers, the length of that line out to Bow Desert, running through the back of the properties and that sort of thing. And the glazing of the windows of, residents that back onto it. They're on 300, 400 square blocks. They're a stone's throw from the back of that rail line. Like, they're going to need triple glazing on their windows. Like, a guarantee to start guaranteeing the residents, because so far you're listening, but we're not hearing anything back from you guys, and that's what the residents are up in arms about. There is nothing that you guys are saying to us today that I haven't heard before. That is nothing new. You're saying that it's going into your EIS, but what's been added? The public don't know anything. We're still in the dark about what's going on. what you're going to do and how you're going to benefit Logan. You call it an enhancement, it's not an enhancement for us. This is a detriment to our lifestyle. It's doom and gloom basically for the Logan residents. Don't know if you want to answer it, it's more of a comment for you.
I can talk to the mitigation if you like, but I'm not sure of the specific question, sorry.
But, you know, noise mitigation, building those barriers would go a long way.
Perhaps what you were asking is just for absolute clarification around the options that are available to local residents in terms of the mitigation measures and a greater publication of them in the community, on the website and in the mail, in the local newspaper, and no skylights? No, but I think probably greater community awareness is what Councillor Wilcox is saying. I know that it was mentioned about a newsletter going out, and I don't know the scope or the size that those newsletters go out, or whether it's just to people along the line, or whether it's a kilometre away, or how that works. But I think that's what you're chasing, isn't it, Councillor?
I know Mr Mayor asked me where I got this from yesterday, and it did come in my mailbox, and that's where I got it from.
Lovely.
I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people in this room that have never seen it before.
So if we have no further questions from the floor, you bugger. Councillor Bannon.
Just one, I know you, like we get where you're coming from. You didn't put the rail there. You're just doing your job. We get that. We cop things on roads and stuff all day. So just, if we seem aggressive, like I know, I'm sorry, it's not a personal attack. It's just, we're just going to deliver the message that we get given. So we know it's not, we're not aiming it at you. That's just from my point of view.
I appreciate the comments and absolutely don't feel that we're in any way offended, or it's our job. Part of building infrastructure, actually this is a really important part, so we'll come here as frequently as you like, and we'd like to think that it will be frequent. I'm not put off in any way by the questions, or it's important we hear those concerns, but I nonetheless appreciate your concern. What I do ask for, we ask it in the community, is that things are dealt with respectfully. The moment I hear yelling and shouting will be the moment we'll stop, which is not something we want to hear, and we've had to on occasion do that. Not in Logan, I might add, but elsewhere we've had some death threats and a few other pretty unpleasant things. Nonetheless, our intent is to continue to engage as frequently as we can. I'd love to be standing here for the next, your 4-year term, copying questions from you guys. I'm looking forward to it. That's your job and my job.
I think one of the hardest things for all of you, we deal with numerous people who are impacted, is the ambiguity, right? You're really unsure about what's coming, you don't know what the impacts are, and we can't give you full clarity because we're not there yet. So that's why we're opening this dialogue. We'll get there, and just, I guess, have some patience with us as we internally work out the answers so we can keep coming back and sharing them with you. Sometimes the hardest part with this conversation is when you start the dialogue and you don't have all the answers, people feel immediately frustrated. Well, why don't you know everything already? We're actually trying to talk about it as we go, so there is this two-way conversation. So please bear with us, ask us questions whenever you want. We'll tell you when we don't have the answers, and we'll try and find them and give them to you when we have them.
I guess the residents' concerns are that if we get to that stage, it's too late.
Yeah.
Get to which stage, sorry?
Get to when you come back to us with an answer, that then it's going to be too late. I think that's what most of the concerns are. If you guys don't have the answers for us now, that by the time you get those answers, it's done.
I think today's been really productive to hear from all of you about your key concerns. We already, I guess, have a good overview on what the council staff have shared with us because we meet with them regularly. But I think what you've given us today too is a huge amount of insight for us to go, here are all the key points, this is what we need to continually come back to you with. So when we have updates, that's us being accountable to you to say, here's the information.
Now, Councillor Bannon stole my thank you. I would like to, are there any other questions from the floor? There being none, on behalf of Logan City Council, I'd like to thank the members of the ARTC for their attendance and presentation. I know it's not easy sometimes answering questions when there are probably more comments and frustrations being transmitted, but certainly you've given us some answers, and we hope that you'll come back with some more, including those mitigation strategies and opportunities for local residents. So is there a mover for the motion to thank the deputation? Councillor Bradley, seconder, Councillor Raven. Thank you very much for your attendance today. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you. Do you want us to vote?
Oh, show of hands. Yeah, forgot that bit. I'm tired and I need to go to the bathroom. Can you please put your hands up so that we can all see them? Councillor Wilcox, you have not raised your hand. Would you care to elaborate on whether you're abstaining or opposing?
I will abstain.
Thank you very much. Mr Mayor.
Yes.
I've got some general...
If we could just maybe
a moment,
pause for 10 minutes. Just to,
sorry, you would like to adjourn for 5 minutes?
Yep.
Mr Mayor has moved that we adjourn. Can I have a seconder? All those in favour? Can you turn... Unanimous, thank you. Thanks very much, everyone. I move that in accordance with section 261 of the Local Government Regulation 2012, the meeting be reopened at 12:31 p.m. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Raven. Thank you very much. Mr Mayor. No, all those in favour? I forget the democratic bit. Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's been a long morning. Madam Chair, I'm quite concerned on the presentation of today. There was a lot of questions unanswered and the implications are severe for our residents in that area. I think that the average resident would be really concerned about what's going on. It's up to us to protect the residents, and I think rather than be baffled with all the engineering stuff that they put to us, I think we need help. Madam Chair, I'm going to put a resolution up, and I'll say it quite slowly so the minute clerk can pick it up. Madam Chair, I call for a future report.
Just one moment. Yep.
In regards to engaging a professional consultant to provide independent advice in relation to the ARTC Inland Rail project through Logan. I'll move that.
Thanks. So Mr Mayor has moved that. Can we see that up on the screen? Do we have a seconder? Councillor Wilcox? All those in favour? It's unanimous. What? We gave it a shot.
There's nothing on screen.
Does anyone else have any general business that they want to raise? Councillor Bradley.
I would like to ask for a report to come up about a particular intersection in Division 1, and during the recent local government election, a lot of people raised that this was quite an issue, and so hence why I'm wanting to this particular intersection that is up on the screen, hence why I'm asking for a report to come up specifically about the intersection, so that the Director of Road and Water Infrastructure, in conjunction with Road Infrastructure Planning Manager, be requested to prepare a report to a future City Infrastructure Committee meeting in relation to the intersection of Chatswood Road and McGowan Road, Springwood. So,
thanks very much. Councillor Bradley's moved a motion. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Bannon. All those in favour?
Thank you, Councillor.
Unanimously carried. Now, there was one last thing. I note that due to social distancing restrictions... Oh, is there any other general business? Pardon me?
That's okay. I'll talk to the minute clerk about it afterwards.
Thank you very much, Councillor Aaron. I note that due to social distancing restrictions, not all managers or staff could attend today. That being said, does anyone have any general business for the Director of Road and Infrastructure? None? That completes our agenda for today. I declare the City Infrastructure Committee meeting of 9 June 2020 concluded at 12:34 p.m. Thank you very much.